Viewers, and welcome to today's info sharing session. We'll be covering the processing of general ledger journal transactions. Now, general ledger journals can be used for processing a variety of different transactions. Firstly, if we need to go to our general ledger maintenance, and we need to go look at a couple of defaults specific to general ledger journals. Under my defaults, I've got journal batches. And in here, we can set up automatic numbering for our journal batches, as well as a prefix to be used when processing those journals. The same option would apply for batch referencing number, either automatic numbering, as well as a prefix for those batch reference numbers. Details about the default line text options, and very importantly, the transaction code to be used when processing ledger journals. So once those have been set up, we can begin processing our journals. Just update that option, and we're then going to move over to our general ledger transactions journal batches. Right, so it's general ledger transactions and journal batches. I'm going to open up a new batch. And you'll see that we've got our batch number there. We've got our batch description. So it could be something like perhaps maybe a monthly batch, for example, a depreciation journal, etc. Specify description there. We've got our transaction code. And very importantly, do you wish to clear the batch after it's been posted, either yes or no? We then can have three types of batches, namely a standard batch, an accrual batch, or a foreign currency revaluation batch. Under the new line defaults, we've got details about the date options, the references, and the description. So I'm going to, for example, increment the references and copy the previous lines, and same thing would apply to our descriptions. And just details about the text defaults and the lines, as well as the batch details. So there's our batch number, the description, and the agent who created that particular batch. Right, once those have been specified, we can now begin processing the batch transactions. So you'll see we've got our batch date, and it's giving us our financial period from our financial categories or financial periods specified under the common module. So if I, for example, process or specify a previous month, you'll see that we now have the period has now changed to period 49. It's going to process it as at the current month. And now it's really a case of specifying a general ledger account, a reference, and then an amount. And obviously, very importantly, just the credit line. So I'm going to, for example, specify a credit account. And what you'll notice is that the batch reference numbers and descriptions have incremented based on the settings I specified when the batch was created. So we've now got the two line items, a debit and a credit. You'll notice is that at the bottom that the debit and credit columns are in balance. So I can now continue processing my line items. So just say, for example, we're going to be using another option, and just say, for example, 300. And I'm now going to use and we're just going to, for example, make this 299, and you'll see that our debits and credits don't balance. So I'm just going to go validate the batch, and it tells me that there's an imbalance between the debits and the credits, which I would now need to go and correct in order for the batch to be processed. I'm going to make that 300. And there we go. Debits and credits are in balance. If I validate now, no validation errors, the batch can be updated. So the system does ensure that the debits and credits need to balance before the batch can be updated. So if I take it a step further, I'm going to go create a new line item and just say, for example, And I can say, for example, 400 as a debit, and then I can have multiple lines to make up. So for example, I can make that, say, for example, 250. And then I can, for example, use a 125 there. And always ensuring that those amounts do balance, all in order, debits and credits do balance. And I've got my references, descriptions, etc. Always good to validate. No validation, so that the batch can be updated. And now it's simply a case of posting the batch. Save my changes. I can now print the batch file and do a sort option by either account, reference date, or no particular sort option. And if I preview, I've got my batch information. There's my batch number, all the transactions, description, references, and all the values available. Now it's simply a case of closing the screen. And I can now post this batch and update the general ledger. Right. That's the processing of a batch. Now, very importantly is that you are able to export a batch and then also import the batch if required. So for example, you may have instances where you may be using information that you want to import into Evolution via a batch. You can certainly use the import-export function. I'm going to go create a new batch and just go and use the incrementing of references and descriptions. And I've got my details there, and I'm going to say OK. So the easiest way would really be to create a template, which I'm going to be creating a 2-line template, which I'm then going to be exporting. So I'm going to say, for example, and I'm going to give it just a reference and just make it 1, and then the same thing for also make that 1. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to create a 2-line batch in order for me to obtain the templates. I'm just going to, once I've done that, I'm going to go to say batch and export. And really now it's a case of saying, where do I want to export this particular batch to? You notice is that it's going to, the batch is exported in a .csv format, and always good to export with a header record. I can now specify the field delimiter as well as a date format to be used, and as well as a date separator. So I've specified my export location, and there's my details, and I can say OK. Now at this point, I can view log files. So I can say, for example, yes, I want to view the log file, and it's going to give me details of where the batch was exported to, the number of records, and in this instance, there were no errors during the export. Close. And now really it's a case, I'm going to go say batch. I'm going to clear the simply because we don't need to process those line transactions. We simply just get the import or export layout. And now I'm going to say close the batch. So there's my batch one. Save those changes. And I would then go and populate the relevant information into my CSV file, which I'm intending to import. And I could simply then go back into the current batch that I used. And I'm going to go to batch, this time import. I'm going to go browse for the batch or the location where the import file is to be located. Once again, as a .csv format, specify the header record and date information. And just go browse that file. There's my batch that I'm intending to import, or the file. Open, and I say OK there. And there were no errors, so no need to view the log file as there were no errors. And there we go. Then imported information from a batch, from a CSV file into my journal batch. and I can then simply go validate, no errors, and then post and update the batch. So the real idea here is simply to create a 2-line batch, export the information so I know exactly what the import template is required, or the requirements for the import template, populate the import template with the relevant information, and then open up a new batch or the existing batch, and then import that information from our CSV file into the batch. So really a very useful way for you to import information into a batch, into Evolution, by using a .csv file. I do hope you've enjoyed my presentation. Thank you for tuning in. It's over and out from me, and goodbye.